All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Lee, and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m., so we'll begin our presentation shortly. Today on February 1st, we'll have our presentation on Does the New Normal Impact the Old Ethics? For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box, and we'll be able to answer those during the presentation. Also, we'll have an interactive webinar with the presenters today by submitting your ideas through questions box and poll questions. So please be ready to share your inputs. Here is a list of sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. These are the list of upcoming webcasts. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit utahapa.org webcast and register for your webcast of choice. We are now offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics or law credits before the end of the year. These webcasts are available to view at utahapa.org webcast archive. To log your distance education's CM credits, go to planning.org CM, select Activities by Provider, select APA Ohio chapter, then select Distance Education and select your webcast of choice. Follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook to receive up-to-date information on planning webcast series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. And we also upload the previous presentations on YouTube. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to planning.org/CM, select today's date, February 1st, and then select today's webcast. This will be available for 1.5 CM credit. Please use the event code 22716 to log your credits. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Cythia, who will be introducing our speakers for today.
Thank you very much, Ben. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And today we are going to try and engage you in a discussion about ethics and how the new economy that has emerged from the recession impacts ethical situations. I'll introduce myself first. I am a transportation planner. I have expertise in working with local, state, and national government, and I do a lot of work on transportation, creating community mobility, complete streets, safe routes to school, comprehensive planning and visioning. For many years, and I will be moderating today's session. Our other speakers include Bruce Knight, who is the Planning Director of Champaign, Illinois since 1988. He is also an adjunct lecturer at the University of Illinois in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning since 2003. Previously, he worked as a city planner in Liberty, Missouri, Iowa City, Iowa, and as a regional planner with the Mid-Iowa Development Association Councils of Governments in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Bruce joined APA in 1980 and became a certified planner in 1985. He was elected to the AICP College of Fellows in 2003, and he served as the president of APA from 2008 to 2012. He was on the board of directors from 2000 to 2008 and was an Illinois chapter president from 1997 to 2000. Bruce has a BS in Urban Planning from Iowa State University and an MA in Public Affairs from the University of Iowa. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our second speaker as well so that we don't have to interrupt to do that. And the second speaker is Les Pollock. He is a principal consultant and co-founder of Camiros Limited, which is an urban planning and zoning consulting firm in Chicago. He has a wide-ranging practice, and he is recognized for his work in neighborhood planning, transit-oriented development, and zoning. His clients include numerous large and mid-sized cities across the country, such as Baltimore, Maryland, Chicago, Illinois, New Orleans, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Toledo, and Raleigh. He also works in many cities in Illinois and many suburban communities in the Chicago area. Les has served on a number of public and professional boards and commissions related to urban planning. This includes serving as an elected city council member and the chair of the Planning Commission in Wilmette, Illinois. Currently, he serves as a member of the Mayor's Landscape Task Force in Chicago and is the immediate past president of Lambda Alpha International, which is an international land economics honorary society. Les has also served as an adjunct and full-time faculty member in planning for the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign and Chicago, as well as the Illinois Institute of Technology and Loyola University. He is the author of numerous articles and papers on various aspects of planning and zoning and holds degrees in architecture and urban planning from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. We wanted to also point you to resources on the session. It is available to you to find this information online as well through the APA website. If you have a problem that you need specific answers to, you should contact the ethics officer. This is the only person authorized to give formal advice on specific cases. So you should contact that office, and you can do that through the website. And we also will provide that information further into the session. My slide is not advancing. Well, we can go ahead and turn this over to Bruce to proceed and come back to me later. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is a bit of an experiment, I would say, because this was a session we did at the Illinois Chapter Conference, and it's intended to be interactive. So as was suggested earlier, we're going to have some poll questions, and we're also going to encourage you to engage with us through the question box so that we can try and make this as interactive as possible. So why talk about ethics? Well, of course, as certified planners belonging to the American Institute of Certified Planners, we are required to practice in accordance with the standard of practice. Also, citizens have a right to expect that we're going to help elevate governance, not fall to its more base level that all of us see far too often and recognize. Planners have an ethical responsibility to our colleagues, to our clients, and to our communities, and we need to understand what those are. And when it comes right down to it, ethical scenarios are rarely cut and dried. There's a high level of nuance. There's more gray than black and white. And therefore, spending time talking about different possible ethical scenarios and thinking about how they fit into our code of ethics is helpful to prepare us for those real-life scenarios that we'll have to negotiate. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the code of ethics itself as kind of a framework for our discussion of some scenarios as we move along. Code of Ethics offers codes, rules, and procedures to help certified planners negotiate the ethical and moral dilemmas that they sometimes face. It embodies the values that define our profession and the behavior of those of us that practice it. The first section of the code includes aspirational values and ideals. AICP cannot enforce actions against a planner for violation of these aspirations, but they should not be ignored. They really set the framework for, much like a vision for a plan sets up the way it's implemented. the aspirational ideals are kind of the vision statement for the AICP Code of Ethics. The second section of the code is a list of rules of conduct. These are rules that AICP can and does take enforcement actions against planners when they violate them. The third section provides the procedures for handling code infractions. It provides information about what happens when there's an alleged violation, the rights of the planners accused, and a timetable for action. And then the final section, planners convicted of serious crimes, automatic suspension of certification, means that if you're listening to this webinar from a prison somewhere, you probably can sign off now because you're not going to get any CM credits. So the principles to which we aspire include, first of all, our overall responsibility to the public. It includes being conscious of the rights of others, concern for long-range consequences of present actions, paying special attention to the interrelatedness of decisions, providing timely, adequate, clear, and accurate information, giving people the opportunity to have a meaningful impact on the development of plans and programs that may affect them, expanding choice and opportunity for all persons, conserving and preserving the integrity and heritage of the natural and built environment, and dealing fairly with participants in the planning process. I like to think that these aspirational values are really just all about being a good planner and doing the things that are our professional responsibility. Our responsibilities to our clients and employers include exercising independent professional judgment, accepting the decisions of our client or employer concerning the objectives and nature of the professional services we perform, and avoiding a conflict of interest or even the appearance of a conflict of interest. And that one, of course, is something that I'm sure we've all experienced. I like to use the rule that if you would be worried about it being on the front page of the local newspaper, it's probably an appearance of a conflict of interest. Finally, our responsibility to our profession and our colleagues. This includes protecting and enhancing the integrity of our profession, educating the public about planning issues, and this is a real key one because a lot of the kinds of concerns that exist out there, you know, sometimes it's easier to just go with the flow, but our public doesn't necessarily understand the implications of some of our planning issues. So taking the time to really try to educate them is critical. Describing and commenting on the work and views of other professionals in a fair and professional manner. Contributing to the body of planning knowledge. Giving back to the profession, that is. Do not accept the applicability of a customary solution without first establishing its appropriateness to the situation, and aiding the professional development of students, interns, beginning professionals, and other colleagues. So now that brings us to our rules of conduct. And again, these are the rules that can actually be enforced if it's determined that a certified planner is in violation of them. They establish the code of conduct for how we work with our employers, other planners, other professions, and our citizens. Their intent is to ensure that the fair treatment of all involved in the planning process, sound decision-making based on the best information, and legal and ethical behavior by all the certified planners out there practicing. They're also designed to ensure that AICP planners fairly represent their ability to undertake a job or assignment and don't take on more than they're really capable of. The rules include providing adequate, timely, clear, and accurate information on all planning issues, not accepting assignments when the services to be performed involve conduct that we know to be illegal or in violation of these rules, not advocating for a position that you advocated against within 3 years, and not accepting other employment without full disclosure to your employer. Not accepting compensation or other advantage that may be perceived as related to public employment, not performing work when there is a possibility of gain to a family member without consent from your employer, and not using to personal advantage, nor that of a subsequent client or employer, information gained in a professional relationship that the client or employer has requested to be held inviolate or that we should recognize as being confidential. Not accepting work beyond professional competence unless the client or employer understands and agrees that such work will be performed by another professional that's competent to perform the work and is acceptable to the client or employer. Not accepting work for a fee or even pro bono that we know cannot be performed with the promptness required by the prospective client or that is required by the circumstances of the assignment. And not directing or coercing other professionals to make analysis or reach findings not supported by available evidence. At this point in time, I'm going to turn this over to Les Pollock, who's going to kind of talk about the practical application of this before we get into the scenarios. Les?
Yes, I think I'm ready. I don't know if I'm being heard. I'm waiting for my slides.
I think the slides are up, Les.
Okay. Then somebody will suggest to me how I see the slides. Bruce, can you suggest that to me?
Are you logged into the website?
I am logged into the website, and I'm staring at everything here. I know that I assume my voice is coming through, and people can see my screen, but I can't see the screen. So, which makes it kind of hard for me to, wait a minute, here we come, okay.
All right, you should be good now.
Thank you, thank you. And Bruce, just tell me how I advance this since somebody else
Just say next, and I'll go ahead and advance it for you.
Okay, thank you. So there was a technical dilemma that I had to deal with. But what I'd like to spend the time here is with the ethical or moral dilemmas that we have to face in this profession, because in essence, we all live in worlds of gray, not black or white. We live in a political world, whether we like it or not, because we serve a political process, which is nothing but a process that are trying to make decisions against some sense of a moral checklist that people might hold. So we have to be carrying out our role in the sense of a set of moral principles, or basically well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what we ought to do. And Bruce has given us a list of things through the Code of Ethics that begins to lay these out. Because planning's politics, we know that someone benefits and someone loses, and it's that issue that often creates the ethical dilemmas that we have to do. And the more complex a community is, and the more the constituencies there are, the more complex the decision process is. So it's easier to make decisions in a small town with a simple set of constituencies than it is when in a large city with many, or in places where there's tremendous competing interests. Next slide, please. So I hold, in a simple sense, that there's really 5 big rules that we have to operate. And this, if you ever read Robert Fulghum's Everything We Learn in Kindergarten, he's probably right. But here they are in front of us, and realizing that if we lie, cheat, steal, or favor, we're probably going to get found out in time, and that's going to have adverse repercussions, some of these greater than others, so that as any ethical or moral person, we have to deal with that. And I like to think that rather than thinking about the golden rule, we often think about the obverse side of that golden rule, and that's don't do anything to others that you wouldn't want them to do to you. So put yourself on the sides of either set of petitioner or the city, and say it's not what I want to have done right, but don't do anything to them that you don't want to be in a position where So it's all about being honest and above board. And that sounds easy, but there are challenges that are always in front of us. But you know, one of the things that we should really bear in mind is the issue that we deal with are normative issues, how things should be. And nobody has the answer to all the questions that we're dealing with. So one may always doubt oneself and then seek out and take a direction offered by others that may or may not get you into an ethical twist. But because we're dealing in this normative sense, it's often best, I believe, to look back at your own professional training and draw your decisions based upon that, and having the ability to be able to solidly defend those decisions. In planning, no one is any more right than the other person if you have a sound basis upon which to render decisions. Next, please. So there are two choices, I think, as planners, and they deal directly with the ethical issues. One could choose to be a technician, to not make decisions, to put forward reports to your planning board that cites the pros and cons but doesn't cite a recommendation. One can choose to say that the decisions are made by the elected decision makers and it's not my role. My role is merely to provide information. If you do that, then you pretty much removed yourself from the ethical dilemma, because you don't have to make decisions, and it's in the decisions where the ethics are involved. But if you're going to be a professional, and you go back to the definition of professional, which implies that you are making decisions, you will be in the thick of ethical dilemmas, and to be a planner places you in the thick of these dilemmas. You may have a boss who says, I don't want you to make any particular recommendations. All I want you to say is list the pros and cons. But indeed, in the act of doing that, the way you make your arguments becomes, list those arguments becomes persuasive in one direction or the other. So, you know, you're really never just a technician in this. And I believe that while we're not about necessarily being about dogmatic in the directions that you want to recommend or the decisions that you want to offer, you have to be in a position to be a planner and feel good enough to actually create, if you will, ethically challenged situations where the teaching, the discussion, and the decisions come out. Because if it's just black and white, we haven't really done our job. Next, please. So I'd like to talk a bit about three sets of ethics here: administrative ethics, situational ethics, and plant ethics. Administrative ethics are all about how one administers one's work. And if those of you who are listening who are just taking orders, you still have to have a number of issues to deal with in terms of administrative ethics. But basically, we're talking about such things as how you deal with personnel, hiring decisions, promotional decisions, relationships with peers, relationships with customers or with applicants, or relationships with citizens. And how we move through that on how we make our decisions are all ethical issues. And as we come to the next stage of this presentation, we will offer some scenarios which raise administrative ethical questions to deal with. And in many respects, so much of the code of conduct that Bruce has touched upon before deals with issues of administrative ethics. Situational ethics is how we respond to the cases that we're, positions that we're put in. It deals with how do you cope with, or how do you act in terms of responding to orders from above that may or may not meet your sense of right or wrong, or may or may not meet your full understanding of what your job is or what the requests are being made of you are. These two are looked at some of the scenarios. Meeting management is probably a very key aspect of situational ethics, and while the maneuverability isn't as great as people can do in Congress, we at the planning and plan commission levels have a lot of situational ethics to deal with at the meeting point. Who questions get answered? What is the structure of the agenda? How long are things allowed to run on the agenda? How much information is actually presented in a staff report? How is that staff report presented? Each of these can be manipulated in a way to create a positive or negative understanding of a case before you. Now, it's not that one does this purposefully, that one decides that they're going to advocate one side and then the other, and creates a situational ethic problem in terms of meeting management. But unwittingly, we often do that, and we need to make sure that we are sure to put forward both sides of the issue very clearly and be able to also present the clear understanding of the case from a professional point of view. There's other sort of meeting management, situational ethic questions. When do I cut off debate at a public hearing? How do I know everybody out there is done? Do I just fail to look around because the gadfly in the community is still raising their hand and wants to say something for the 17th time? Or do I have to answer these? These are in essence ethical questions. Whose question do I answer? Who takes credit for what? Are all a series of situational ethical questions. There are also, in that same sense, a set of ethical questions regarding ministerial decisions that happens. For example, how does one interpret the zoning ordinance? Is there a bias in one's interpretation depending who's across the counter from you? How does one argue to make certain change in a site plan where there's an application for subdivision, but there's no site plan review, and the legalities of the subdivision are really met? These raise certain questions that you need to address in your head. Somebody comes for a variance. Is a 2-inch side yard variance too much to ask? Is it 2 foot too much to ask? Where do we go? Do we have to have standards for all the decisions we make, or can it be my opinion? And if it is my opinion, am I forced to defend that, and should I be defending that in terms of public rationale? So there are all these kinds of things that we do in our daily professional life that are, in many respects, situational ethical questions. The third category of questions has to do with plan making, and it's in that category that ethics get involved in a different way. The first question, ethical question, is who makes policy? While professionals are, as I held, are supposed to insert themselves into the planning process, of course, and even in the structuring discussion of decisions, whose role is it ultimately to make policy? When do I back off when the Plan Commission decides that they want to go in one direction or the other? How long do I keep arguing that point? These are ethical questions that you have to deal with. When you hear policy being pronounced, is there a rational basis for this policy, or does it appear to be personal desire? Is there an obligation for you to be able to make that clear in the planning process? If a plan commissioner is taking a strong policy position that really isn't planning policy, it's ego policy, and how do you present that politically and politely to be able to facilitate discussion and recognition of that issue? How do you go about making sure that you have or have not inserted your own values in the planning process? Many of us Well, many of us live in the communities that we work. Excuse me. Others of us don't. And we may be there as employees, and we may have sets of values that said, well, I like working in this town, but I really wouldn't want to live in this town. How do you control your values? Do you that you hold in terms of the way you view quality of life and the way the constituency of the community views quality of life? How do you strike that balance? If it's so apart, is it time to leave? Is this just a job, or is this a job where your own ethics and your come into question as a professional? Lastly, there's the question of how you present information. How do we edit reports? How do we edit findings? How do we structure the plans itself to tell the story in a fashion that makes sure that the interests of the various constituencies who are a part of and critical to the community are well represented and well reflected, so that the plan itself isn't a one-sided argument. And this brings me to a concluding observation that I'd like to make here, and then we can move into some scenario discussion. And that is, I think that we, in this day and age, are facing a series of challenges in dealing with the continuously evolving and changing planning ideas and development trends. One of the realities is, unless it's that we all get older and we think the world moves faster, is that the world seems to be changing more quickly. In fact, because of the communications media, because of the web especially, it allows people to secure bully pulpits quite quickly without even having to prove their bona fides, and begin to advocate for one approach versus another approach. One creates one's blog, it links a blog to a system or an area where that world of discussion is carried out, and people hold dogmatic positions about one thing or the other. And in our profession, it might be about the role of sustainability, or new concepts like form-based code, or the advancing the goals and arguments for protection in terms of climate change, when there may be people who hold this different positions. How do we make sure that what we're doing is not just right in terms of our own moral compass, but that is really right in terms of the way our constituents view these issues? And I suggest that there's an ethical issue here, that we shouldn't be looking at the trends and fads as the driving issue in their own right, but we need to be able to compare that and bring those back to first principles of planning, which is really good balance in the quality of development within the community. And that means going back to first principles and asking, how do these trends relate to the notion of building community, connectiveness versus isolation? How do these trends assure equity within the community? How do these trends allow and encourage choice of lifestyles and people who hold different lifestyles to coexist within my community? And how do these trends help me plan to make sure that I can provide a quality of life for the future populations? So we need in essence, almost an ethical sense, think about the kinds of techniques that we come to applaud and surround, and make sure that in our own advocacy and our movement to create a better normative situation, that we don't go ahead and put ourselves in the adverse sides of the plan or situational ethics that I spoke of before. So that brings me to the end of these comments. And Bruce, did you want to now handle the scenario issue?
Yeah, I'll set this up for the next part of the discussion. So in my term as APA president, one of the opportunities I had was to travel around and talk to a lot of planners around the country, and it was pointed out to me many times the pressures that our members were facing because of the economic situation that our country was in, and the economic situation that many of their communities or their employers were in. And they started to see some new issues that they hadn't experienced before arise. Pressure to alter a recommendation to achieve a win for their employer or community. Pressure to withhold or alter information to influence the decision-making process in a way that might be beneficial to the economics of the community or the business. Pressure to find new sources of income to make ends meet, as some of them had hours reduced or income reduced as a result of the economy. Pressure to ignore a conflict of interest, again for economic reasons, and pressure to do whatever it takes to keep or get a job as planning departments were scaled back and department budgets reduced as communities suffered the economic consequences of the recession. So a lot of economic-based issues that really were impacting our members and raising new ethical questions for them as they went forward. And we thought that might be a nice framework for talking about ethics and trying to make them relate to really what many people are facing today. So as Les mentioned, we've got some scenarios here. I'm going to read through the scenario and then go to a set of poll questions that we're going to ask you all to respond to so we can get a basis for the interaction that we'll have around these. So in this scenario, a planning director in a small community receives an application for a rezoning to allow a new restaurant to be built. After reviewing the city's comprehensive plan, he determines that staff should recommend against the rezoning. He subsequently goes to discuss this with his city manager, who suggests to him that the community badly needs this development, that the new food and beverage tax dollars that would be generated would help the city's budget and perhaps even the planning department's budget. He suggests reconsideration of the staff recommendation. How should the planning director respond? And here's your choices. A, agree to change the staff recommendation. B, agree to change the recommendation, but only if the city manager will commit some of the new revenue to the planning department budget. C, agree to go back over the analysis of the case and consider a change if it can be supported, but make no promises. Or D, refuse to change the recommendation because you believe it violates your code of ethics. Ben, you want to put up the poll question, or the poll?
Yeah.
And Cynthia, you might facilitate this part because, as you'll recall, I can't actually see the poll results coming in.
We have 68% now, 69% who have voted. We get up to 80%, we'll close the poll. We have about another minute left. If you haven't voted, please get your vote in. We'll close the poll now. So I will share with you the percentage who responded. You've got 3% said A, 6% 28% said B, 78% said C, and 13% said D.
Very good. And if any of you that voted in any of one of those choices would like to send some comments our way as we're talking about this, as to why you thought that was the case, we'd be happy to hear those and use them to add to the discussion. Kind of talking through these, Cythia and Les, you might want to comment on these. Only 3% agree to change the staff recommendation, and the biggest percentage, yeah, I'll take another look at it, but I'm not going to make any promises. Your thoughts on those responses?
Well, I'm not real surprised to see this. I mean, on the one hand, this is probably the rational approach because, first of all, your boss just told you to go take a look at something. So you're going to say, I'll go back there and see what I can do about it. The challenge is that you've already now been influenced. The issue, the interesting question from the people who 13% or so that said I'm not going to change my recommendation. These guys are ready to walk the plank, I would presume. So what happens is, unless people hold different perspectives than I expect that we'd go back there and look at it real hard, and I'd come back the next day and I'd say, you know, I looked at it again, and I just don't know what I can do with it. I can't split the baby in half. I mean, that's the issue. How much can you back off this question? And it rapidly becomes, unless you've got a better answer, you know, the thing we should do isn't this restaurant, and isn't this restaurant revenue. If we're really looking for economic development and revenues community, let's not do it a piece at a time. Let's try this other program. So you tend to bring in a counter offer, which shows that you're thinking as a planner, and also shows that you still can't support this kind of notion.
And I would add that in your response back to the city manager, you should cite the specific plan and code issues that support your position, and at that point then you could say, because I read this way and I can't recommend otherwise, you know, given the fact that I feel this is what I am supposed to be doing in my job here, is supporting the plans and ordinances that we have approved through our elected officials.
I think that's a really important point, not in the form of cover, but the plan, you know, assuming that you can agree with what the community's plans say, perhaps you're the maker of those plans, to the support provided, or using the plan as cover, if you will, is an extremely important thing, because most often that plan has been forgotten by others. It gets immediately forgotten at the council level, and oftentimes it gets forgotten at the administrative level, where there are other pressing issues such as finding more money. So one of our roles as planners is to be the continuing educator about the documents that and policies that the community has adopted, and then what we're really doing here is trying to carry them out. And if they're not good ideas, then they ought to come back up for reevaluation.
Yeah, let's say, in fact, the you know, in the aspirational values, educating the public is one of those. I also think, if you believe in the plan that's guiding your recommendation, your obligation to the public in those aspirational values and the way the rules relate to that really call for you to try and, again, look at the long-term consequences of immediate actions and take that into consideration. I'm interested that as many as 9% agreed to change the staff recommendation, and 6% of those were using it to try and leverage more money for their budget, which is, I don't know, maybe a little bit over the edge.
I could share. Yeah, I was going to share a couple of comments. One of them that came in said a professional should always be willing to review their work, and another said that they would want to see as many details as to why staff made their choice, and the planning board report could simply state that this use does not coincide with the goals of the master plan, without recommending one way or the other. And that does depend on how your city does things. In some places staff are required to make a recommendation, in other places they are not. We had one person, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think both good comments, especially the first one. You know, the scenario doesn't really get into much detail of how the recommendation was communicated, but really starting to lay that all out would be important to making the case.
I note that somebody has said, can you tell us the answer before moving on? No, because there is no right answer. This is the nature of the business. If there was a right answer, then I don't know if we would have the ethical issues. The fact is, everything's gray here.
And I would say that, you know, from my own personal opinion, somewhere in the combination of C and D is probably the right answer. As Les pointed out, you may very well go back and do the analysis and come back and say, I'm sorry, but, you know, here's the reasons why I can't change my recommendation. But there is gray area involved here.
We did have someone post a comment saying that they meant to vote C and they accidentally voted A, so perhaps some of those were clicked in error.
Very possible. Any other observations on this one before we move on to the next scenario? All right. So scenario 2, a planner for a suburban community has had her hours cut to 35 a week as a budget-saving measure. She is subsequently contacted by a developer in the region who offers her an opportunity to do some consulting work for his company on the side. What would the appropriate response be? And here's your poll questions. A, jump at the chance, that says change, but it should say chance, to make up the lost income so you can cover your bills. B, tell the developer that you are interested, but only if you will not be doing any work that involves the jurisdiction you are employed by. C, tell the developer you are interested, but must first get the permission of your employer. And D, tell the developer no because you feel that it would be perceived as a conflict of interest no matter what. And Ben, you can open up the poll. Feels like we should have some elevator music playing in the background while this is going on.
A lot of thought going into this.
So Ben, can I switch over to see the voting from the poll? All right, so we have poll results. People who answered A, 1%. People who answered B, 18%. C, 39%, and D, 42%. So we have some differences of opinion about how we would proceed on this. Would anyone like?
The question, Ben, can we get the question up for a minute, just so we all remember what B, C, and D is?
Interesting, a lot more split in this one other than the jump at the chance question, but a lot more spread between the reaction that people would have, which indicates more gray area perhaps here.
And I think it does depend on the community that you're in, the specifics of the developer that you would be working with, and in some cases you might very well feel that the developer is active in your community and that any work with them would be perceived as a conflict of interest.
Les, I'm curious, you're in the consulting business. You probably do some work for developers. I don't know that for sure, but how would you feel about bringing on somebody that also works for a community that you sometimes work in? You think that might create a problem in some way?
I think that if it's a temporary relationship and that person actually is still working at that community, you've got a big problem. We didn't, frankly, if we got in this business to make a lot of money, we made a mistake. The reality is we got to keep our hands clean here, and we got to keep our interests well separated. We just have, we have a policy that, except if the city is a vast size, like Chicago or New York or something like that, you really can't get involved. You can't represent both sides of the private development industry and the community. And if you find yourself there, you begin to wonder, who is your constituency? Who are you responsible to? And I think it's better to try and keep a separation here than to jump over. And I understand well that I have both a public and private practice. I understand well that there are very enlightened developers, some of them much better planners than the cities themselves. But you got to figure out where you sit ethically and professionally, and that's a real challenge.
Yeah, the issue that comes to mind for me is even if you're not going to do any work that involves your jurisdiction, when the developer does come to your jurisdiction and needs an approval, you're in a very difficult position at that juncture, and you better have a depth of department and the understanding of your employer that says, I'm going to stay completely away from any case that involves that developer. And even then, people might be concerned about the influence that would have on the department's recommendation.
It's one thing about an appointed official, a plan commissioner or something, to accuse themselves because there's a potential conflict. But it's real hard for the employee to recuse themselves from an assignment. You may be the only employee of the city having the knowledge and the skills that are needed to do the review that developer brings in.
Yes, we do. One person asked which answer would be correct on the AICP exam, and I think we should clarify that none of us, I believe, served on the committee to develop questions for the exam. These were not questions we pulled from the exam. They are examples of situations that you may be encountering that we are providing you with things to think about and ways to respond.
Yeah, all of us took the exam so long ago that it was a paper exam.
Well, that's correct. And people also had a variety of things to say. They felt like more than one answer would have been appropriate, a combination of them. It depends on whether the work would be in their county or not. It also depends on the work of the developer and whether they work in your community a lot or not. Size of the community, people said the variables certainly do depend on the situation. One person said it's not worth the grief. They feel like, several people felt like it would be too difficult to position themselves as not being influenced, and that it would damage their professional reputation by creating what was an appearance of a conflict of interest. So people had very thoughtful responses and are clear on the fact that it does depend on the situation that you're in and how big your community is and where the developer works.
Yeah, those are all great comments and great observations. I think, first of all, I will say right up front that as in working on the poll questions, they were intended to be gray and to leave a lot of what ifs and hopefully create a conversation about filling in the blank on some of those. I think C in particular is really interesting. They got 39%. The bottom line of C is it may very well be that at least no public sector employer would grant the permission in the first place to work part-time for a developer that does business in your community. So that might put an end to that real quickly.
One person asked for us to expand on the notion of perception of conflict.
Well, that's a good question. I can talk a little bit about how I would see that, and Les and Cythia join in, please. I think sometimes there's a situation where even though you may know in your head and in your heart that you won't be influenced, that you won't be impacted, or you won't alter the way you think because of an activity that might take place. Say you go to lunch with the developer and he or she buys. Lunch, it's $10-15. It's certainly it's not going to influence the way I feel. But if the head of the neighborhood association in the neighborhood where a rezoning case is in the same restaurant and sees you sitting at the table with the developer, and even more so sees the developer pay for lunch, what do you think they'll perceive? Do you think that they'll think there's a conflict of interest there and be concerned about it? I think that's the essential elements of a conflict of interest that's perceived.
Yeah, I think that's why it's called a perceived conflict of interest. And facts are terrific, and everybody wishes that things were judged on facts, but they're really not. They're judged on how people perceive the situation. And this is the situational ethic question, and I think that Bruce's example is the best one. And you have to ask yourself, if I put myself in the situation, how can the world see me? Not how can the most enlightened people see me, but how can the average guy see me? There may be, if you will, a town crazy who you can't do anything right by them. But how can the general people see what I do and make that and have come to an understanding? And that's something that you, in terms of your own internal set of measures, have to work with.
And I think Les may have had similar experiences to me, given his background, but having served on a planning commission, having served as a consultant, and having represented a neighborhood association and done training for planning commissioners, the perspective and how things looked, my perception was dramatically different depending on which seat I was in. And so you have to try and put that hat on and ask yourself those questions from the public's point of view as to how it will be perceived. I have a question. Go ahead.
My only point is, don't think for a minute that you have to be all things to all people. You can't be. You really have to be clear in your position that you take, and that's going to upset certain people. And you have to know going in that if there are issues involved, there's going to be people who are happy with what you're saying, people who are unhappy with what you're going to say. So therefore, you need to keep, in essence, yourself out of situations where those unhappy people can say, I knew it all the time. It was a conspiracy. He was working for the other guy.
And we had one question which I thought was interesting to be discussed here. Someone wrote, I am a consultant but serve as the planner, in quotation marks, for some small communities, and I have wording like C in most of my contracts. But it does not happen often, but the community often supports it because it may involve something like writing a new chapter of the zoning code to enable something like a continuing care community, and a developer ends up paying for this work and the community gets a chapter in their code to have for other situations. Item C allows and there's another person who brought it up, but I thought I would put that out there because there are a lot of places where consultants are retained as expertise for the Planning Commission because they're too small to hire a planner. And so how do you balance that?
Well, that's a fair professional role. I don't think that relates to the kind of question that we have in this scenario, but just a comment about that. One of the things that we found over time is you could be working for a community and somebody submits an application and it takes an involved review, and the community says, well, we don't have the money, but the developer will pay for your review. I would suggest the best thing to do is to say, thank you very much, have the developer pay you, pay the town, and the town will reimburse me. But there's not a direct relationship between the two of us. Oftentimes what we've done in some communities is establish escrow accounts where the developer actually escrows the money into an account, and then the community hires the consultant to carry out the work. So there is a space between the consultant and the developer. There's no money directly being exchanged. And in essence, what the applicant is doing is paying a fee to the city for the review.
Yeah, Les, I think that's a great point, and I also think the key to all of this is full disclosure. The transparency of whatever relationship is out there and why it benefits the community and the public is critical to the outcome here. We ready to move on to the next scenario?
Okay.
Yes.
So here's scenario 3. The mayor of a community approaches the city planner and indicates that a friend of his is planning to move a new employer to the community. This company will create up to 60 new jobs. You are aware that the site of the proposal is owned by the mayor's brother and have a concern that the infrastructure of the site is not adequate to support the project. The mayor strongly encourages staff to support this project. How should you respond? And here's your choices. A, agree to a staff recommendation in favor of the project. B, make a recommendation in support, but with the condition that the developer will have to make infrastructure improvements. C, tell the mayor that you feel he has a conflict of interest and that you cannot support the project. Or D, tell the mayor he has a conflict of interest and should not vote on the project, but assure him you will evaluate it carefully and develop your recommendation neutrally. And so, Ben, you can put the poll up.
Ben, how many people have answered so far?
We have 67% voted.
Give it a few more seconds so that you all can finish your answers. Okay, Ben, I think we can close the poll. So we have 1% answered A, 35% answered B, 6% answered C, and 58% answered D. And so maybe we can get the answers back up on the...
So the two most popular answers are making a recommendation and support with the condition that the developer improve the infrastructure, and tell the mayor he has a conflict of interest, but assure him you'll evaluate carefully in developing your recommendation.
I would assume that the mayor understands he has a conflict of interest. That doesn't mean he might not influence the vote, but he probably understands he's a conflict of interest and probably will recuse himself from the process. But there is this notion of persuasion out there because he's the boss who wants things to go. So I think that really what maybe most people are saying is I'm going to assume that he's got a conflict, but I'll do my best job in putting forward a proper recommendation.
Yeah, the scenario never said that the comp plan wasn't consistent with this use. It just said that there's an infrastructure issue. So, the conflict of interest, I agree, Les, is sort of a sidelight, and you hope the mayor does the right thing there, but it probably shouldn't change the way staff approaches evaluating and developing a recommendation, and
right.
Maybe that's the thing that's most important to make clear.
We had some comments and questions. One person said that they had a friend fired from a job on this same issue.
Very interesting. Yeah, it happens, and especially in highly political places. Les in his comments noted that planning is political, and it is. I've always said that planners need to understand politics, but can't be involved in playing politics because that's going to get you in trouble very fast. But in those environments, you're very much at risk.
Now, one of the realities of our profession, whether you're a consultant to a city or you're the planning director, is there's going to come a time when it's time, the city decides it's time to change horses. It's time to change horses because the plan has been around too long, and maybe the mayor feels they're getting too influential, or mayor's just getting, as an example, they're just getting tired of getting poked by this guy who keeps putting stuff in front of their faces. So this business is not a business of lifetime security. It's important that as we go through this, we build for each of ourselves a sense of professional respect, because everyone it's going to be time for us to go shopping, if you will.
We had another person respond by saying none of the above, that the planner may not be in a good position to chastise the mayor on the mayor's ethics, and that there may not be a city code of ethics, so the planner ends up in a role of referee without city ethics to choose from.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the thought that they just need to do their staff work, you know, as thoroughly and neutrally and appropriately as possible, and let the mayor try and influence the vote however he wants to, but you know, form your recommendation based on the true facts of the case.
Yeah, because that's really where your ethics lie.
Right, and some people responded by saying that D is probably the most realistic answer, because you need the ability to say that you are doing what you can to cooperate, but it's not a black and white world. That was what one person wrote in.
I think that's a good point. Were there any other comments or questions there, Cynthia?
There were, yes, indeed. One person responded by saying, telling the community CEO that he has a conflict is not smart from an employee's point of view and does not advance sound planning decisions. Another person commented, don't lie, don't cheat, etc. Another person said you can always make infrastructure improvements a condition, but the conflict issue should be addressed.
Yeah, and if you're in a large enough city that there's a city attorney, you can give that person the dirty job of addressing the conflict question.
You know, that brings up a small comment I'd like to make. We live in a litigious society. When people get unhappy now, they sue if they got any money. And in the development business, people sue. And the planner is in the middle of all this. And you've got to be sure that what you can say is defensible in a court of law, that you can show the rationale for your actions. And the worst thing you want to do is get twisted up in a set of potentially contradictory type of decision making where you become impeached as a witness, and therefore impeached as a professional because you weren't able to show the clear logic behind your decision based upon the type of information and policy documents that you as a planner would be expected to rely upon.
Great point.
One other person posted that the mayor is not bound by the AICP Code of Ethics, and while that is true, when I was on a planning commission, I suggested that our Code of Ethics was something that was important for not only the planning commissioners to look at and consider, but for the city council or city commission to also look at and consider. So I think that bringing up the idea that as public officials we are bound by a code of ethics will help the community function better, rather than people just focusing on what's legal or illegal, because as we all know, we've been in communities where things might have been being conducted legally, but it created a situation in the community that was very conflict oriented and made the body not functional. So I think ethical behavior helps to enable good planning and good development and progress in the community.
Cythia, I would add to that the number one, most every state has laws with regard to ethics for public officials, and so, we should all also understand and know what our state law is. The second thing I would say is that APA provides a set of planning principles for all people participating in the planning process that are not just for AICP planners. And we've shared those with our Plan Commission and ZBA and our City Council so that those are in front of them as well.
This creates the opportunity to talk about the planner as teacher and the need for continuing training of members of plan commissions and indeed city councils. People come aboard these volunteer organizations, they either run for election or get appointed, and they come in with a set of perceptions as to what the world is about. And I'm sure that some of you will chuckle when I say, how many times have you been asked by somebody what you do, and you struggle to explain, and they still walk away with a blank look on their face as to what the role of planning is. But here we've got these butchers, bakers, and Indian chiefs, who are all now members of plan commissions, and it's important that we make sure that there's a general understanding of how the planning process works, the obligations placed upon the planner, the kind of ethical obligations that we have, the role of the policy documents that they're creating, and the kind of factors they should be weighing in their decisions. The more you do that, the greater the chances that you remove these ethical conflicts, because the role of the guy, the plan commissioner, or the city council person, begins to understand more clearly their role and how they need to play it.
We had one other comment. Person said, "My firm learned that the hard way to address." Learned this the hard way to address this sort of conflict up front, unless you want to make friends with the FBI.
Yeah, good point. All right, we have one final scenario as we're starting to get near the end of our time, so let's go ahead and move to that. So your mayor is in a difficult re-election campaign, and you are aware that he is supported by the development community. He comes to the planning department and suggests that given the state of the economy and the housing development slowdown, it is time to lower the city's development standards. He feels that by doing this, new development will be encouraged and the city's budget will improve. How would you respond? And here's your choices. A, get the specifics of what changes the mayor wants and process the amendments. B, suggest to the mayor that this topic be scheduled as a study session with the whole city council to see what kind of support exists for the proposal. C, explain to the mayor that such a reduction in standards comes with a long-term cost to the community, even though there are short-term gains and that the public should be made aware of this. Suggest a study session to address this. And D, tell the mayor he has a conflict of interest because of the developers contributing to his re-election campaign and indicate that you cannot support his proposed changes. And Ben, you want to open up the poll?
Well, Ben, when we get to 70 or 80% of the people responding, we can go ahead and close the poll. One thing I would like to add while we're waiting for everyone to get their votes in is several people have asked questions in relation to the AICP exam. This session is not a prep session for taking the exam. There are webinars and other online resources for doing preparation for the exam, and I would suggest that you look at those if you're looking for that kind of information. This is a continuing education credit. So we have the poll results in here. We have 2% answered A, 29% answered B, 67% answered C, and 2% answered D.
Very good. So I think most people are in the, you know, get them to share it with the whole city council and have a conversation. As you again think about the aspirational values and the expectation that we educate and that we think about the long-term consequences of short-term gains, you know, C sort of jumps out. I think a lot of people saw that.
Ben, can we put up the response options again, please? Thank you.
Les, any thoughts on this one?
Well, you know, oftentimes cities tend to put issues like this on the table of making things more affordable, and at times that's really not what happens. This is one of the, I think, one of the greatest challenges we have, because the political process operates on such a short term. You know, it's 2 years or 4 years, depending how your community works. And so when we say we're really worried about 20 years out or so, and the mayor, he's got a budget to fix for the next year, and he's got a whole term of office in 4 years to get himself set up if he wants to run again or to do the right thing. This creates probably one of the most substantial challenges, I believe, that we have in our business, because we are truly, if you weigh, operating on a time frame that's different than the rest of our society here. This is where it takes some of the most profound argument from the point of the planner to be able to show the decision makers the cost of trying to resolve something in the short term. And in certain ways, that's our best offense when we have this kind of issue, because very often it's a lot easier to make certain immediate changes, make certain immediate adjustments so that our costs of operation for the next year or two are down. And where you see this headed, as a planner, headed in the wrong direction, you got to go back and you've got to say the cost of doing this over X number of years and the impact upon on our revenue structure and our budget structure really is going the wrong way. I mean, this is the national issue that we're having right now. So again, the best defense that we have here, or offense that we have here, is to employ the policy documents that we have in place, and especially if a capital improvements program that looks out over time, to force the decision makers to at least confront the implications of making short-term decisions to their community over the long term. You've got to put that mirror up to this, because nobody else is going to do this other than the plan.
I have some comments I could share quickly before we wrap up here. One person wrote in that some communities do have standards that exceed what is necessary, that changes may actually be something that would be better in the long term, but that it should be driven by the city council and the community, not just the developers. Another person answered C, but they would also want the council to be involved with the study session as well as the public. And one person responded by saying, vote for the other mayor candidate in the election. So any further thoughts on this before we finish up here?
My only thought is I think we go back to the idea also that as planners it's our job to enact the policy and direction that our policymakers and our community set. So I think the comment that this should be discussed and decided by the city council as a whole with community input is a very good one.
Mm-hmm.
Cythia, do we want to go back to your PowerPoint for the closing slides on this?
Yes.
Ben, if you could do that. While we're getting to those closing slides, I'd just like to thank all our participants for so actively engaging with us. It's really, I think, made this work well.
Well, I'm having trouble getting it to switch over to my presentation here. So I have the final information for you about how to access the website.
Well, I could bring it up here as well. You want me to do that?
Yeah, why don't you do that? I think maybe I'm frozen up.
I had that problem when we were practicing.
There we are.
All right, so.
So has everyone seen the slide that says, does the new norm, well, that's the beginning of the presentation. We need to be further back.
Yeah, I switched through, so.
Ben, are you able to get us to the position that we would like to be in to share the information from the website? Well, we can read it off to you, and we can also post the presentation will be saved. So you can go to www.planning.org/ethicscode.htm, and you will find information there. Also, in terms of specific questions regarding a situation arising in your practice, you can direct those questions to the ethics officer at that same address. And then we have our contact information on the last slide as well, and our email addresses. Ben, are you able to put that up?
Yeah, I'll put it up right now.
Thank you.
All right.
There's our information, and how soon does the presentation appear archived, Ben? Do you know?
It'll be up in a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank everyone again for participating, and I would like to thank Bruce and Les for all of their work and sharing of their experience and insights into the ethical dilemmas we face as planners. And take a look at the website that shows future webinars that you can participate in, and thank you again for attending.
All right, thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you, Ben.
For those of you who are still in attendance, I just want to go through a few reminders. First off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to planning.org/CM. Select today's date, February 1st. and then select today's webcast. This will be available for 1.5 ethics credit. And also, we're recording today's session, so you'll be able to find it on YouTube. All right, thank you.
The organizer has ended the session, and this